Okie dokie, let's get started. So I would want to explain quite briefly the difference between used to plus infinitive compared with be or get used to plus gerund or noun. Now, quite a lot of English learners get these wrong, they make mistakes with them, and it's absolutely key that you have both of these structures perfectly correct in your head and that you're able to use them perfectly correctly. Let's have a look at used to plus infinitive. So used to plus infinitive is to talk about, let's say, past habits. So something that was true in the past but is no longer true now. So if taking my own example, I would say I used to live in England. I used to live in England. That means in the past I lived in England, but now I don't. Now I live in Spain. So I used to live in England. So this talks about habitual activities, habitual states that were true in the past, but that are not true now. So I used to live in England. I could also say, for example, I didn't used to play tennis. That means in the past I didn't play tennis, but now I do. So used to plus infinitive in the negative implies that you didn't do this in the past, habitually, but now you habitually do it. So both examples again. I used to live in England. That means I lived in England in the past, but now I don't. Now I live in Spain. And in the negative, I didn't used to play tennis. That means I didn't play tennis in the past habitually, and now I do play tennis habitually. Good, that's used to plus infinitive. Now let's look at be used to plus gerund or noun. This is a completely different concept. This is talking about being accustomed to something or having adapted to something. So this implies that if I say, for example, I'm used to speaking in Spanish, that would mean that I'm accustomed to speaking in Spanish. It's not a problem for me anymore, but it does imply that it was a problem, or it was difficult, or it didn't feel completely natural in the past, but now it does. So if I say I'm used to speaking in Spanish, that would imply that it was a problem in the past, but now I've adapted, I'm now accustomed to it, and I'm fine with this. So be used to plus gerund or noun. I could also say with a noun, for example, I'm used to the heat in Spain. Of course, in England, it's not very hot ever. It's rain, it's cold. But I've adapted to the heat and now it's not a problem. So I'm used to the heat. Now we use get used to plus noun or gerund when it stops becoming a problem. So I would say, for example, when I first arrived in Spain, I wasn't used to the heat. That would imply that when I first arrived, the heat caused problems for me. But I would say I got used to the heat after my first summer in Spain. So I adapted, I became accustomed to the heat after my first summer in Spain. So get used to is to talk about when you adapted, when it stopped becoming a problem. Okay, so those three sentences again. When I first arrived in Spain, I wasn't used to the heat. I got used to the heat after my first summer in Spain, and now I am used to the heat. So you can see this with the verb be or get, then it's followed by used to, and then noun or gerund. Now, when I said that you need to have both of these structures perfectly clear in your head, why is this important? Well, it's a typical mistake for English learners to make where they combine both of these structures and it becomes very, very difficult or almost impossible to understand what you're speaking about. So I'm going to give you an incorrect sentence now that we can analyze, and I'll explain why it's important to have these structures perfectly clear and perfectly separate in your head. If, for example, I say, I'm used to speak Spanish, it's incorrect, okay? What you can see is that the person here is combining both structures. We've got be used to, and then we've got the infinitive. I'm used to speak Spanish. Now, if you say a sentence like this, nobody will understand what you're speaking about. Why? Because they don't know if you're saying, I used to speak Spanish. So in the past you spoke Spanish, but now you don't. Or I'm used to speaking Spanish, which means I'm accustomed to it. So you really have to have both of these structures perfectly clear. If you've got be or get used to, you can only have noun or gerund, never infinitive. This is the key. And if you use used to, it can only be with infinitive. So what you need to do, you need to practice both of these structures separately. Use to plus infinitive to talk about past habitual actions and activities, and then be used to plus gerund to talk about things that you're accustomed to. Practice them separately, have both structures perfectly clear in your head, and then you will not make mistakes. I hope that helps.